Latin America and the Caribbean have achieved great success in terms of poverty reduction. It was the first region to achieve the Millennium Development Goals related to poverty and hunger. However, along with economic slowdown, progress in poverty and hunger reduction, as we saw in the previous presentation, has stagnated and in some cases reversed. Inequality persists, particularly in rural areas, excluding millions of people from the dynamism of development and resulting in pockets of hardcore poverty remaining in the region. Moreover, with the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, Latin America and the Caribbean faces new and even more challenging goals. If we continue in this way, we will not eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, nor reach the other goals related to the first Sustainable Development Goal. What is the challenge that we face? First, as we can see in the graph, after years of progress, poverty and extreme poverty, both urban and rural, are on the rise. Second, poverty and extreme poverty are much higher in rural areas, as they have been historically. The first two columns on the graph refer to rural and urban poverty rates, while the second two columns refer to rural and urban extreme poverty rates. You can see the stark differences between the two. What is the magnitude of the challenge we face? In 2014, 28.5% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean lived in poverty, corresponding to 168 million people. This percentage increased to 30.7% in 2016. That's 186 people in 2016. Extreme poverty increased from 8.2% in 2014, or 48 million people, to 10% in 2016. That's 61 million people living in extreme poverty in the year 2016. Poverty is significantly higher in rural areas compared to the overall national figures seen on the slide, and over 2 times as high in the case of extreme poverty. Rural extreme poverty is over 3 times as high when compared to urban extreme poverty. Between 2014 and 2016, the percentage of people living in poverty in rural areas increased from 46.7% to 48.6%. That's almost half of the rural population. While the percentage of people living in extreme poverty increased from 20% to 22.5%. That's almost 1/4 of the rural population in the region living in extreme poverty. As evidenced by the stark differences between rural and urban areas, inhabitants of rural areas faced enormous disadvantages from the moment they're born, particularly women, members of indigenous communities, Afro-descendants, youth, and those living in historically underdeveloped rural territories. These disadvantages will be accentuated by the setbacks in reducing poverty that the region is experiencing, possibly affecting millions of people in the future. Another challenge we face is the chronic nature of extreme rural poverty. As we can see in the graph, overall rural poverty rates in green have fallen much faster over the past 15 years, while extreme rural poverty has reduced much more slowly in orange, or not at all. This implies that eradicating extreme rural poverty, achieving SDG 1.1, will require efforts far beyond what is being done today. Poverty is not distributed equally between and within countries in the region. As we can see from the map in blue, the incidence of poverty is significantly higher in specific countries in the region, as seen with the darker shades of blue. And similarly, as we can see with the country maps in red, the incidence of poverty varies substantially by territory or by department, in this case, within countries. It is thus not irrelevant where one is born and grows up. In countries and departments and other territorial spaces, children, young people, and families face economic and social disadvantages across a number of dimensions. These trends in the data suggest 2 fundamental imperatives. First, in order to eradicate poverty and reduce inequality, we cannot continue with business as usual. We need innovation, new ideas, and a new push in our public policies. Second, this requires embracing a rethinking and revitalization of regional institutions in rural territories in order to foment dynamic local economic development and social inclusion. For precisely this reason, the community of Latin American and Caribbean states has requested FAO to develop a plan for accelerating progress towards the 2030 SDG agenda in selected territorial spaces, particularly those with the highest levels of hunger and extreme poverty. In order for the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean to meet the challenges of the 2030 agenda, they must renew their strategies for rural development. It is necessary to innovate in public policies in order to assure the economic and social inclusion of the most vulnerable sectors of the population. This is fundamental, not only because it is just and because it will lead to social cohesion, but also from an economic perspective, unleashing the productive potential of millions of people who have been left behind by the current process of economic development. The rural space is not the same as it was a few decades ago. The increasing linkages between rural and urban space and the development of small and medium-sized cities can best be taken advantage of by utilizing a territorial approach to rural development. The transformation of agri-food systems are central to this process. Migration, seasonal and permanent, domestic and international, is and has been a fundamental element in this process and has taken on new dimensions and new urgency in recent years. This year, FAO is co-chairing, along with the International Organization on Migration, the Interagency Global Group on Migration, in support of the member countries of the United Nations who will sign a new global compact in migration. So focus on migration this year is particularly important. Latin America and the Caribbean is starting from a strong position in terms of facing these challenges. In recent years, besides strong political commitment, the region has been the source of much innovation in rural development public policies, including on access to assets, provision of services, access to markets, creation of new institutions, the provision of social protection, and the participation of organized civil society in policy processes. We also have the political capital and the institutions necessary to regain progress in the fight against rural poverty called for by the 2030 Agenda, and to assure a process of inclusive rural transformation. We have the Food Security and Nutrition Plan of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States that concretizes the political commitment of the region to end hunger and rural poverty. We have the Specialized Meeting of Family Farming, REAF, of Mercosur, the Central American and Dominican Republic Commission on Family Farming, and the Central American Integration System, SICA. In the Caribbean, CARICOM is the appropriate institution to move forward this agenda. How do we move towards inclusive rural transformation? First, we need to recognize that poverty is multidimensional. A reduction in income poverty does not necessarily translate into improvements in the multiple dimensions of well-being. Second, it will be near impossible to eliminate poverty, extreme poverty, without confronting the multiple dimensions of inequality between regions, territories, women and men, and ethnic groups. Third, addressing territorial differences is key to eliminating extreme poverty and inequality. Fourth, many people migrate as a means of escaping poverty. Generating economic opportunities in rural areas is fundamental in order to give people options and alternatives to migration. Fifth, there is consensus regarding the need to overcome the fragmentation of policies and institutions regarding rural development, and the imperative of promoting multi-sectoral approaches and improving the efficiency of public investment. At the heart is improved articulation of national policies and territorial dynamics. What kind of public policies do we need to promote sustainable and inclusive territorial development? First, in order to unleash the economic potential of rural territories, we need strategic territorial investment. This means identify and provide incentives for investments that have the most potential for revitalizing rural territories and reducing poverty. Investment in infrastructure is a determining factor, but must go hand in hand with social investment and strengthening governance. We need policy instruments that increase access to productive assets, such as land, water, energy, into financial services in credit, savings, and insurance, and non-financial services such as technical assistance and information. We need to reconcile and articulate environmental, economic, and social agendas. For example, in approaches such as agroecology or initiatives such as the Global Program of Action for Small Island Developing States. Finally, we need to treat family farmers, rural youth, micro and small enterprises not as beneficiaries of policies, but as agents of change themselves. Second, the social dimension of sustainable rural development is key. We cannot leave anyone behind. Social protection is key for rural areas. Despite the current fiscal retrenchment, we must continue strengthening social policies. In fact, during an economic slowdown, it is not the moment to reduce social protection, but on the contrary, to expand it. It is when people need it most. People need jobs. We must focus on policies that lead to rural entrepreneurship and the generation of higher quality, formal agricultural and non-agricultural, decent rural employment. Specific policies focusing on employment and social inclusion for youth in rural territories to provide them with economic opportunities in both agriculture and outside of agriculture. One good example is the work that FAO is carrying out together with IFAD and governments of the Caribbean. Increasingly link social protection with productive inclusion, as is being done increasingly throughout the region. For this approach to work, it is essential that social protection be aligned with interventions in agriculture and other economic sectors in a comprehensive framework for rural development. For example, FAO is supporting the development of a strategy for bringing together social protection and productive inclusion with SICA. Inclusive policies for rural women, cognizant of the specific barriers that they face, and focus on economic empowerment. Finally, differentiated policies for indigenous peoples in recognition of the specific vulnerabilities that they face in their special cultural, social, and natural resource management roles. Third, strengthen rural development institutions. The quality of institutions is a key determinant of rural development and is crucial to improve capacities within institutions. Sustainable rural development cannot be done alone. It requires the creation of new and innovative coalitions and alliances which include the great diversity of people, organized civil society, and institutions in rural areas. Moving, Mr. Chair, to the recommendations of the Regional Conference. First, recognize that in Latin America and the Caribbean, poverty reduction has stagnated, and request support from FAO to support countries in the region in the strengthening of comprehensive strategies for the reduction of rural poverty. These strategies include strengthening and expanding social protection and its articulation with strategies of economic and productive inclusion, reducing inequality, particularly for women, youth, and indigenous peoples, and the economic and social revitalization of rural territories. Second, request FAO support to help member countries addressing the challenges faced in the rural territories subject to migration due to violence, lack of opportunities, food insecurity and rural poverty, limited access to resources and services, as well as exposure to environmental risks. Third, recognize the economic, social, and cultural value of family farming and request FAO support to help member states in the strengthening of comprehensive and differentiated policies, paying particular attention to the potential of family farming for the conservation of biodiversity and the sustainable management of natural resources. These policies for family farming provide a sustainable foundation for the reduction of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition in the most affected territories. Fourth and final, request FAO technical support to accompany government in the design and implementation of public policies and multi-sectoral public-private governance systems that ensure the development of inclusive agri-food systems. As inclusive agri-food system, an inclusive agri-food system will generate nutritional, social, environmental, and economic benefits that extend opportunities for family farming and small and medium-sized rural enterprises, as well as for all rural citizens as consumers. Thank you very much.